Mr. Allen.
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing well, man. We're doing well. Yourself?
Good. Bless you. Good morning, Pastor. How are you?
Good morning, how you doing?
Good morning. Thank you. I'm good. Thank you.
How's the family doing?
Everybody's well. Thank you. How about your family?
All is well.
Sister Grace?
All is well. Sister Grace is doing fine.
Praise the Lord.
And hello to all you out there in Facebook land that then logged in already.
Good morning to everyone. This is our Sunday school lesson for July the 19th. Israel demands a king. The lesson text comes out of 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 1 through 11, then 18 through 20. Our golden text for this morning is coming out of 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 7. The Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people and all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Israel demands a king. Israel demands a king. That's one thing about people. Not just God's people, but people. We demand a lot of things. Even though God is blessing us, even though God is watching over us, he meets all of our needs, but for some reason our needs are never good enough, and we want. And we want to be like other people. And that's a positive and a negative at sometimes, is that we want to be like other people. And here the Israelites are. Here the Israelites are, and they wanted to be like the other tribes. They wanted a king. Isn't that something? They wanted a king. If I get someone to read verses 1 and 2.
And it reads.
And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judge over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joab, and the name of his second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. So here it is, Samuel, when Samuel was old, he came to appoint his sons judge over Israel. And then now the name of his firstborn, say the name of Samuel, his son, and who he was wanting to appoint over Israel. They were judges in Beersheba. So this was what Samuel wanted to do when he had come to be old in his age.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, do we understand the difference between judges and kings?
The thing, what I wanted to say in reference to that, the judges, when there was a time appointed, the judges, they became kings for a moment, and then they would go back to doing what they normally would do, and they were appointed by God.
Absolutely. They were appointed by God. And just like Mr. Allen said, they came for a certain time, a certain period. If a crisis rose up with the Israelites or something like that, God would send a judge to watch over them, to care for them. But you have to understand is that a judge never ruled over people. God was the ultimate ruler, and they took their cue from God. But okay, so if judges didn't rule over people, then what do kings do?
Kings do the ruling. So the judges were only appointed by God to be saviors, to deliver the people, to deliver the Israel out of their trouble at the time. You know, they would settle disputes and make sure justices and injustices were not happening among the people. But when a king came along, he would actually do the ruling. So Israel did not have a king because God was supposed to be their king. God would do the ruling over Israel. He was their king. But at the point where we're going now, they want to go another way. We know the other nations had kings, but the kings, as I said, did the ruling over the people. The judges did to try to clear up disputes and injustices and make sure everybody was treated fairly. And also they may have led them in battle against their enemies from time to time. They might have been military leaders as well as the judges to make sure things were gone. But they never ruled as a king over the people.
Okay. And the other thing about judges is that kings sometimes form dynasties, but judges never did that because God was the ruler of them. God was the one that appointed them. And that takes us right into, if no one has any more comments about verse 1 and 2, that takes us into verse 3, if I can get someone to read it.
And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes and perverted judgment. So we see here that the sons, Abiah and Joel, that Samuel appointed to be judges. We know that Samuel is considered the last judge. Samuel was a judge, he was a priest, he was a prophet. We know Samuel was raised in the temple by Eli, and Eli had crooked sons. So this was an example that Samuel had to go by. He walked in a godly way. Samuel did what God told him to do. He honored God and he was committed to God, because that's how he was raised to do by Eli. But it's letting us know in verse 3 that his sons didn't do that. And that just goes to show just because we or our mothers or our father, let's say our father is a pastor, our mother is a pastor, you know, they used to have a joke that the preacher's kids were the worst kids that ever come. So just because your mother or your father is walking in a godly way or serving God or saint, doesn't mean the children are going to turn out that way, even though they may raise them. I'm not saying that Samuel didn't raise his sons to walk in his ways, but they chose not to. You can walk and do what your parents tell you what to think, because if they say go to church, you're going to church. But when you get old enough to make that decision for yourself, you may not go to church. You may not want parts of God. So here it's saying, letting us know that his sons did not walk a godly way. They did not follow after his teachings of what he may have taught them, but they ran after money. It said they turned aside after lucre, which is money, and they took bribes. And we know that in the laws and stuff that in Deuteronomy and Alberta, it's telling them that that's something that they, as judges, were not supposed to do. They were supposed to treat everyone fairly. Nobody was supposed to be taking money. So it's like they took money to give different judgments. So the one who had the most money, you know, the one with the money was the one who got what they wanted done. It also said they perverted judgment. So they didn't judge fairly. They used the money and the power to do. So we see here in verse 3 that they were totally different from what Samuel did as far as judging the people.
Okay, let's stay here for a minute. What was Eli's problem? What's the one thing that Eli didn't do to his sons that probably would have made a difference?
The same thing. He did not. Eli's sons were the same way. They turned after their own way. They didn't follow Eli's godliness, and Eli did not chastise them for it.
Okay.
They did what they wanted to do. They perverted the judgment. They treated the people unfairly. They stole from the temple and all those things. And Eli didn't punish them for it. He still let them have the power that he gave them, and as priests or whatever it was. But he did not punish them. Did not chastise them for their wrongdoing.
Okay. So Eli didn't discipline his sons. He didn't discipline his sons. But Eli raised who? Who did Eli raise also? Samuel. Okay, he raised Samuel. So if Eli didn't discipline his sons, why didn't Samuel follow in the path of Eli's sons?
It will often it's a ripple effect. You know, if you're teaching, you can only teach so far as you have been taught yourself. So it's just kind of like a ripple effect passed down. What Samuel learned from Eli, then he passed down to his sons, which that, you know, as Sister McMillan said, that he didn't chastise them for their disobedience.
Okay. Who was Samuel's mother?
Hannah.
And
Okay. And what did Hannah do at the temple for her son?
Pray for him.
She prayed for him.
Hannah took her son to the temple at a certain age so that Eli could raise him. Well, that's what she had promised because she was barren all that time.
But
And that's what she did when she had Samuel.
who did she commit
And
Samuel
that's
to
how
though?
he ended up at the temple being raised by Eli.
Who
And
did she?
Eli was a good example for Samuel in terms of his sons because that's what he had seen from Eli.
Okay. But who?
But he dedicated her son, Hannah dedicated Samuel to the Lord.
To the Lord. Okay. Did that make a difference?
Yes.
Yes.
Why? We do christenings in church all the time.
But Samuel was dedicated as to be a Nazarite, and Eli's sons were not. Eli knew Samuel's purpose, and Samuel had a divine purpose, and therefore Eli gave more attention in regards to that to Samuel, so that he could be brought up the right way.
Okay. Okay. So, and that was great, Sister Robinson. Now, explain to me, if we want our children to follow in most time we want our children to follow in our footsteps, especially men. But if we really want our children to follow in the path of God, what do we have to do?
be the example.
Be the example.
You gotta let me.
Be
Lay
godly.
a foundation.
Lay the foundation. Lay the foundation. You have to notice that Eli, if you will, he spent more quality time with Samuel than he did his own son. He did. He spent more quality time with them. So how do we change, or how do we affect the next generations? And what I'm asking is, how did you? I'm just gonna have to go personal here. We all have children. What did you do for your child to make sure that they knew God rather than they knew what the world was about?
We teach them
Okay.
about God.
Take them to church.
And set an example. Try to walk, in the line of God so they can see God in us, but we teach them most of all.
Okay.
And they have to be that role model for them.
Say that
Lay
again.
that foundation, as it was said, set the example, introduce them to God, and then have them study it to learn about God as early as we could bring them in, because you never know what kids can bring on their heart. But you hope that foundation is being laid by them being in the midst of the Lord and the saints. And that foundation is important, because that foundation will stand no matter where they go. Yes, they may stray, but they will always come back to the Lord.
Okay.
And then you show them by example that you trust them in the Lord, and give them examples as well.
Okay.
And put them in a godly environment, I think, also. And when make sure that what you're teaching them, you're showing them, you're including them, and you're surrounding them with God in a God environment also, I believe would help.
Pastor,
Helps.
I think the most important thing is,
And I think also in regards to being that role model, just to give an example, when Alexis and I are driving her to school, I would pray for her, but then on the other, we would alternate. This day I'm gonna pray, the next day you're gonna pray. Just as the disciples said, ask Jesus to teach them how to pray. We gotta teach our children how to pray, teach them how to read the Bible, and get an understanding of the Bible. We gotta go step by step with it, and we gotta put it in there.
Okay.
I think the most important piece out of everything that we just said is we can try to teach them, we can talk to them about it, but if we're not living it ourselves, then it's hitting all up against the wall. So all that is collectively got to go with, also we got to be the example. We have to. Because we can get them in the church, but then if we run in the streets or we doing something else when we get in the house, or if we cussing somebody out on the phone, unlike what Sister Robinson just said she does in her car where they're praying and talking about God, we have to be that example.
Okay. Let's just pick on PK kids, if you will. Why do you think preachers' kids are the most rebellious kids? Come on.
Usually because it's such a standard, by being, the pastor's kids, there's so much more expected out of them. They're looked to uphold a certain standard because of who they are. It doesn't matter that whether they feel like doing that or want to do it. Their parents are definitely going to teach them because they're the pastor or whatever, the preacher's kid. They're going to teach them, but I think it's the pressure of being upheld to such a high standard just because your mom or your dad is a preacher kind of tends to make them, I believe, rebellious, to show that, well, I'm just like any other kid, I don't have to be like just like my dad or my mom. They're the preachers, not me.
And the other thing is, because of the standard that is set for them, the least little thing that they do that's not to standard is magnified by the world. Because now they're trying to say, well, now you're supposed to be a dad's preacher. So why are you behaving in such a manner? It may not be all that out of pocket.
Okay. Sister Fraser said, raise up a child in the way you should have them to go. The thing that I want you to understand is that yes, preachers' kids have a certain standard that has been put upon them. But the thing about it is that really most preachers' kids are disobedient because they wanted time with their parents. And as a preacher, just like with Samuel and Eli, especially with Samuel, here Samuel is. Samuel is a prophet, he's a priest, and he's a judge. Samuel really doesn't have time to spend quality time with his children. And I think that's sometimes why we fail our children, is that we don't spend quality time with them. We put the church before them. We put revivals before them. We put going to the hospital and praying over people before we spend quality time with our family. And I think that's the reason that preachers' kids are rebellious, because they want attention. And here it is, going into Samuel right now, Samuel's kids, that the elders did not want these two young men to end up being rulers over them. So let's go into verses 4 and 5. Someone read it for me, please.
And all the
All
elders,
the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. And as you were beginning to say, now the elders are not pleased with what was going on. So they themselves came to Samuel to now ask him to give them a king, because of the ways the sons are doing. Because of the things that the sons are doing, now they want a king to judge over them.
Okay.
And like Sir surrounding nations have, they want a king as well.
Okay, all right. Now, this is the question. Was it wrong for the Israelites to ask for a king?
Yes.
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 Yes, it was wrong because, they already had a king.
Yes. Amen.
And
Everybody agree?
Yes.
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 I don't agree.
Sir, what you say, you don't agree?
I don't agree.
I think they were looking upon Samuel's son as being, quote unquote, that king. They weren't recognizing our Lord and Savior God as their king. They were looking at the human person who could put in position instead of a spiritual person. And that was Samuel's son. So they were saying, your sons are disrupted. We need a king.
Okay, Sister Robinson hit it on the head. Now, was it wrong for the Israelites to ask for a king? Yes, it was, because God was their king. They had forgotten all about what God had done for them. He went in there. He brought them out of slavery. He did all the 10 plagues. He takes them through the Red Sea. He wanders them around in the desert for 40 years. He goes in and conquers all the nations that's in the promised land, and he sets them in there. Yes, they were wrong for asking for a king. But I say no, it's because they understood humanly, fleshly, they understood, no, this is not who we want. This is not who we want. Yeah, you're a good judge. You're a good prophet. You're a good priest, but your sons ain't about nothing. Let's just be honest about it. And they didn't want that. Why would you want to put someone in charge knowing that they're already crooked?
Right. And the fact that Samuel was old, they mentioned that he was
There you go.
That means that his sons were preceding. So they definitely didn't want that.
So,
well, it's like you preached about this morning, Pastor, in reference to David, the flaws and the things that David had within himself, and the things that David had done. But the anointing that being upon David's life, it didn't come from man, it came from God. So in that sense, the sons, they were looking at the sons and the lifestyle that they were leading, and they were, in reference to that, the reason why they were making their judgment. But God had the greater plan. God had the plan in His hand, and so they had turned their way, their face away from God, and looking upon what, like you said, the flesh, what the flesh was doing, and what the flesh was, had fell short of.
okay. And I know I said no. I know I said they were right for asking for a king. But this is the problem. They didn't have enough faith in God. That even though they was going to make these people king, they didn't have enough faith in God to know that God was going to work this thing out for them. And the
And the
Israelites.
last part says that they wanted to be like the other nation.
Ah!
We go to Samuel to tell him that he was old, was just an excuse for them to ask for a king, because they didn't want to be different, because they were different. They wanted to be like the other nation. So that was just a way for them to make their point that he was old. And of course, I don't know if I'm going to the next verse, which I think I am, but I'm going to do that. Samuel took that personally.
Okay, let me ask you this then. When we say that we want to be like others, when we say that we want to be like others, don't you want New Mission to be like Louis Chapel?
No.
Why?
Not necessarily.
Absolutely not.
that supposedly are doing great things,
Supposedly.
right?
Yes, as long as it's done in the right spirit.
Okay.
But see, that's where that comes in. When you're talking about the preacher kids, you're talking about maybe they shouldn't enjoy the worldly things. I'm talking about school like prom, go to all the sports events and all that. And something happens at the church and they just do that. And then that's a man's judgment. When we put that foundation in these children, when we put that foundation in ourselves, we got to know what can shake us up. I can go over to this place, he shouldn't be going over there, but I know what my faith is and my God is, and I know the purpose I'm going over there. Sometimes we put our rules in where Christians shouldn't go, but then where those Christians go to evangelize? And I think that they have a human aspect there. But when you see, even today, when you see the government or the politician taking bribes or stealing something like that, first thing you say, we need to replace it. And that's what these people say. We need to replace these two jokers.
The other thing too, they should have been asked them to consult God. Samuel appointed his own sons. He should have, spiritually, they should have asked him, or Samuel should have consulted with God before making his sons, appointing his sons.
Okay. He should have.
Upon himself.
But why do you think Samuel took that upon himself to appoint his son?
Maybe because he was getting older and he wanted to keep it in his bloodline.
Or he was following what he knew, because Eli appointed his son. Samuel appointed his son. In today's world, we have our deacons, not just on my deacons, trying to appoint their kids, or the pastor trying to, not his own pastor, the pastor trying to appoint his kids to be in position in church. And really, they're not ready for that position in
What they
church.
call.
That's true. That's true. Because it says, wait a minute. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel. What this really saying is that the elders just didn't come up with this thing on their own. They spoke to the people, and the people didn't want these sons either. This was, if you will, what some would say is a unanimous decision. They knew how crooked these kids were. They knew how wicked they were, and they did not want to have to go through that for another 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And they came to Samuel with their excuses, you getting old. You getting old, and we want a king. But look at this. Let me ask you something. Well, sometimes we want to have what other people have or be like other people. Let's just admit that. But have you ever studied another religion and said, hey, this might not be that bad? I think I might enjoy this more so than Christianity. Have you ever been tempted to move to another religion?
No.
No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. Don't want to be that different.
Okay, I'm going to leave it alone.
But we know that from the beginning, before God took Abraham and the Israelites into the promised land, one of the biggest things that they told the whole time was not to mingle, not to take on the lifestyle of the nations that they were going to come in contact with, to marry them, not to be like them, not to worship their gods. They were told that from day one. So to want a king like the other nations is still doing just what God told them not to do.
Okay. So what was the Israelites hoping to gain to be like all other nations? It had to be something in it for them.
I think it was just a temptation. Especially when we're younger, we want to be like our friends
wanna be like other people? I think it's just a temptation and looked glorious to them, and they wanted the same thing.
Okay, stay right there. It looked glorious to them. What looked glorious to them about a king? He was going. Go ahead.
The world, the things that the world possessed, the lucre and all of the stuff that they were talking about, the negative stuff. You know, we want the world wants what the world, they crave what the world can offer. But you know, God's ways are different than the world, and so they were wanting to you know, feast on what the world had to offer, what the other nations had to offer, and then that would overstep the guidelines of what God had already laid out.
Okay, they wanted to be glorious. They wanted to feast on what other nations. But think about it. Here they are. If they had a king was going to set things in order. He was going to establish a government. I don't have to go through the elders no more. I don't have to mess with the deacons no more. I don't have to go through all these things. We got a government, and this is the way it's supposed to be ran. This is how it's going to be ran. A king is going to fight their battles for them. That's what they thought. They were going to solve all that problem. If they had to go to war, the king would put together an army. They'd go to war and they'd be victorious in all this. They didn't really think that they were going to have to sacrifice their children to go into battle and fight this war. If they had a king, he was going to fix all their problems, all the things that they thought that was wrong with Israel at that time.
Amen.
But they didn't understand. A king can only pull from what he has. So it was their children that was going to have to go and fight the battles. It was their children that was going to have to serve in the palace. It was their children that was going to have to make some sacrifices. But sometimes we look on the other side of the fence and see how green it is, and that we don't count the cost.
Amen.
Right?
See,
Same thing.
and that's what's difficult to explain to our youth. In our old age, we have already been through these things. We're trying to show you the right way, but sometimes our youth just wants to experience it for themselves. Is that all right?
Yeah. It's like we growing up with the adults that the grass is not always green on the other side. You know, it just looks greener, but you don't know what the person had to do to get their grass green.
And sometimes you just gotta let the youth, since we're talking about the youth, you gotta let them experience it for themselves, because I can tell you my story, but you're not gonna learn better from what I'm saying. Sometimes you got to go through the situation in order to learn from my story, what I told you, and from what you experience as well. They're not gonna listen to us all the time because they think they know everything. So they're just gonna go out there and do it. And then they'll come back and say, you told me so.
That's true. That's true. If I get someone to read verse 6.
But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. What I got from this is that, okay, first of all, I think it displeased him because they were talking about his children. And you know how we are when people talk about our children. And then they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. One thing about it is Samuel knew where to go. Even though he was displeased about their comments, he knew where to go. He knew that he had to go to God. He could have just said, no, I'm not gonna do this, but he went to God so he could get an answer, an affirmative answer of what God wanted him to do and the direction God wanted him to take.
Okay. Any other comments? So, here Samuel is. He's displeased with this thing. They have asked for a king. He's still a judge. And they come to him and say, look, we want a king. You getting old? Your sons are crooked? We want a king. So, was Samuel right to be upset?
Right or not, but he took it personally.
Yes.
And I think he took it personally because he was their judge.
He took it personally.
Yeah, he took it personally because he was their judge, and he felt like, he was still, I would say, the main judge. He just gave his sons a little special area to judge.
Yeah.
They didn't judge all of Israel. They just had a little part of Israel that they judged. And for them to come to him and say, "You've been too old to judge us," I think he looked at it as though they had no more confidence.
Okay. Any other comments?
And it may
Yeah,
have,
I just want to say that, I think he was displeased, because sometimes you blinded by the lights, not just your kids or your friends or whoever, but sometimes those closer to you, you can't see their fault. Sometimes you can't see your own fault. And I don't know, the Bible doesn't say the thing was prayed before he was out his voice, but when he was displeased, he prayed. And sometimes, we forget, Freddie forgets to put God first before he makes a life-changing decision or made a decision. And I think that, not only did you offend me about my kids, but you offended me about my decision. But then he went to the Lord displeased, but maybe he didn't go to the Lord before. So sometimes we forget to ask the Lord to guide us. And that's where Israel is. Like I said, Israel already had a king, and they didn't go, and say, "Lord, are you gonna fix these?" But they went to try to be like the other guys, the other countries. So I think you're blinded by the people that's closest in your circle or something in that situation.
Okay.
and also Samuel may have taken offense. He felt that they thought he was not doing his job, that he was old and he was not making good decisions anymore.
Right.
Why
I
didn't?
think that.
Go ahead.
I think the word that Sister Griffin said, took offense because of the fact that here Samuel is, and he's, have brought them along the way and on the journey. He's being guided by the Lord, and now he gets old, and then now they want, and rather than the decision that he made or he's making, about to make, then now they want to overstep him because they feel like that he's too old to make the decision. Not that Samuel has not been respectable in all the things that in times past, and his decisions in times past, but now he's too old. But they're not looking at that. They're looking at, the son, not looking at the decisions that Samuel has been led and guided by God. They're looking, they see with their eyes on the attitudes and the ways of the son, not the ways that Samuel has been led and guided by God, and that God, like you said, that God is going to make things right regardless of what the decision is.
And also, I don't think that they want the, if when Samuel getting old, I don't think they want him to die and leave these boys in charge. So, because if he didn't make any other decision, he already put them in charge, they would have even more power if Samuel died and left them in charge of everything, judging over everything. And they weren't ready, they were not going to have that because they weren't fair. So they definitely wanted him to know that you get old, and if you leave here and leave these kids in charge, we're in trouble. So let's find a better concourse, a better route to take. Just give us a king like everybody else.
Okay.
I think they're using this as an excuse to get what they wanted to start with.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had already been watching, evidently they've already been watching other nations to know that they want those kind of things that the other nations have. So as Samuel gets older, this is just an excuse to get on a platform that they already have won. A lot of times we are judged by the things that our kids do, be it right or be it wrong. I know when we're in the military, if one of our kids do something wrong, it can come back and to command and get to us in terms of promotions or being reprimanded. I know my father was a policeman, he'd always tell me, if you do something wrong, I can lose my job. So that was a deterrent in a way.
Okay. Why didn't Samuel remind them of all that he had done for them? I mean, he could have. Okay. So, instead of going off on them, instead of letting them know what all he had done, Samuel goes straight to God with this thing.
Yes.
He goes straight to God. God with it. Now, in the flesh, if someone that came, okay, let me ask you this. What's the hardest thing about retirement?
Adjustment.
Not knowing the future.
The hardest thing about retirement is know when to go. When to go. When to go. They were not asking him to retire. They were just letting him know you're getting old. And we don't want you to leave us in this fix that we see ourselves getting into. So that's for a king. That's for a king. And he goes to God. And lo and behold, he prays to God. And God tells him. He said, okay, this is what they're asking for. Let's do it. If I get somebody to read verses 7 through 11.
Okay, I'm gonna try it, Pastor, 7 through 11.
Yeah.
Verse 7. And the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, whereas they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit you protest solemnly unto them, and shew them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. And Samuel told the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. And he said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and put them for himself for his chariots, and to be the horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. You started, Pastor, to allude to verse 7 and 8 in regards to the people, when Samuel went and prayed to God. And in verse 7, it's basically saying that God is telling Samuel, don't be upset. Don't be upset, don't be dismayed. It's not about you. They're not rejecting you. You're the judge. I'm the king. God said, I'm the king. They're rejecting me. And in verse 8, as always, the Israelites, we as a people in today's world, we forget so quickly what God has done for us. So the Israelites have forgotten what the king has done for them by bringing them out of Egypt. And I think you already spoke on this, bringing them across that Red Sea, taking them through the desert. He's done all of that for them. And even so with that, they continue to serve other gods and do wrong. But because he's a just God, he takes them back into the fold. So all of that, they're not doing it unto Samuel, they're doing it unto God. And in verse 9, he said, listen to me, Samuel. This is what I want you to do. I want you to go and talk to the people. I want you to give them a description for what this king is going to be like. And what this king is going to do when he reigns over y'all. Because they thinking they get ready to get something glorious like the other people. Because you don't know what the other people going through with that king. You on the outside looking in. But let me tell you about this king that you guys are getting ready to get. And so everything that God told Samuel told the people, this king basically is getting ready to enslave y'all. He's going to take your sons, your daughters, your children. They're getting ready to enslave y'all. You think you got something good when you get a king, but you don't know how good you got it because you got the king of kings who provide all your needs. This king ain't gonna do nothing for you, but have you to be the slaves. Okay, somebody else can pay it.
That was all right. Okay. Anybody got a problem with 7 through 11? Come on. Anybody have a...
They actually know exactly how they want to be enslaved. Because they're going to take everything from them. They're going to start being taxed. They're going to be treated. Their whole economic system, the whole system will be government, in other words, will be changed. And they didn't realize that.
Okay.
They want to change the whole establishment.
Okay.
And also, he was given, also he given a warning of what this king was going to be like. God is already, and the same way that God even does today, nothing new under the sun. He show us what we're going to be choosing, rather than to choose him. As just as Sister Robinson said, they were looking towards an earthly. They already had the King of Kings, which was the Almighty God.
Okay. Why did God give in to the demands of the elders? Why? I mean, he could have brought up the history of all he had done for them. He could have told them to go somewhere and sit down. It was me that brought you out of slavery. It was me that's giving you all that you have. It was me that provided all you need. Why did he give in to the elders?
I think it was like John said earlier, sometimes we have to learn, not by what we're told, but what we do. We have to go through certain experiences before we can actually learn. Evidently, all the things that he's done, they had learned to think. So now, he's fixing going to a teaching mode again.
Okay. Was he abandoning them?
No. No.
Okay.
Question?
Was he abandoning them?
No.
No. He's just teaching them a lesson.
Yes.
His lesson to them was to give them just what they want. You know, sometimes we ask for stuff, we think we want it till we get it. Or, you know, we just got to have it. And I like the way the commentator said in the thing, the children be asking me for a puppy. They want a puppy. They want a puppy. All they see is the joy of playing with the puppy. But they don't see the responsibility of being the pet owner and having to take care of this puppy once you get it. So he's letting them see that's what they want. They think it's going to have a good time by having a king. So he's going to give them what they're asking for. When we were growing up, my grandmother said, "Just giving you enough rope. I'm going to give you enough rope. Let your hang set." So he's got to teach them. They've got to learn some kind of way because they have to learn from anything else. All the judges they've had, prophets they've had, they've not learned. So, okay, now you want a king. We'll just have to let you see truly what a king will do.
Okay.
And what they didn't realize too, that they would be serving the king. They would be his slave. Growing up, they would take his vineyard, he would take the vineyards and everything, and he's a prophet from it.
What kind of love is God showing right now?
Tough.
Tough love.
Experience is the best teacher. Experience is the best teacher. When I was coming up in Ohio, before I came back to Chicago, my grandfather would always make pancakes in the morning, and we would have White Castles. He would always say, "Tyrone, how many you want?" And I would always say, "Give me 10. He'd say, "Tyrone, how many you want?" I say 10. He would make me sit there and eat 10. Stuff in my face about to burst. But it taught me not to ask for 10 anymore. Just like the analogy of going over there to the grass on the other side. You get over there and you find out it's not as green as you think it is, and it will make you appreciate what you had before you went over there. Those brown spots and all those other things.
Okay. And that's a good analogy because I want you to understand something. Sometimes when we ask God for things, he'll give it to us and leave us to ourselves.
Yeah.
This is what you wanted? Okay. I'm going to give you what you want. But like you all have said, it's a good learning experience. It makes you a better person when you go through some trials, especially when trials that you ask for out of your own. Be careful what you ask for. That's true. Be very careful what you ask, especially when you ask it from God.
Amen.
Very careful what you ask it.
Amen.
Okay, so, and I think it's already been said, but I just want to go over it again. What were some of the consequences of having an earthly king?
They would be taxed.
Okay,
The king would have total rule, because the king is going to, as you said, establish his kingdom.
right,
So they would be enslaved. They have to go, he'll take them, their children, their sons, and make soldiers, and sons, and make workers, take their fields from them, and take their daughters, and make cooks, and maidens out of them, and wives, some of them. So just everything, anything he wanted to do to them, he was allowed to do it. They have to share their land and what they had with the king.
The biggest difference between the two kings, because God is the king of all kings, is that when he rules over us in our favor, gives us what we need. This king was ruling in his favor, doing things for his betterment, didn't have the people's best interest at heart.
Okay. Israel has had a lot of kings. Started out with Saul, kings just kept coming. But majority-wise, did they have the majority of good kings or the majority of bad kings?
Crickets.
The majority was that they had more bad kings than they did good kings. That was the majority. They had more bad kings than they had good kings.
And Pastor, that's gonna happen when you rely on man.
That's true. That's true.
If you rely on man, that's gonna happen.
But even with the bad kings, what did God do? He watched over them. He cared for them. He kept them. Even with the bad king. And this just wasn't the generation that they asked for a king with Samuel. The bad kings and good kings, they kept coming. But each generation had to experience a king. And they didn't know what they was going to get. They didn't know whether it was going to be a good king or a bad king. But God was right there for them. He watched over them. And true, sometimes he left them to themselves, but God was right there with them. If I get somebody to read verses 18 through 20.
And ye shall cry,
And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king that you shall chosen, which ye have chosen you, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And here's Samuel has warned them, told them what it would be like, but they're not listening to Samuel. They don't want to hear that. They want this king. He said, they want a king over them, no matter what. And then the last part said, we want our nation. In other words, they will accept the consequences of whatever it is because they want this king.
Okay? So, if Jesus is my king, what difference should it make in my life? If Jesus is my king, what difference should it make in my life?
all the difference in the world.
Because he's victorious over all. One thing he can't do is fail.
Okay? But what difference would it make?
And that's a benefit to you. Because if he can do all things, we can do all things through Jesus Christ, then the scope of our earthly world should be enhanced. We should be better off than those worldly people.
Okay, let's get specific. If Jesus is my king, what changes should I see in my life? What changes should I see in me?
Positive.
You should be, go ahead, Mr. Allen.
I'm sorry. Well, first of all, you should see the characteristics. You should see the fruit of the Spirit. It should abide in you, and that fruit shall remain in you. That's what it says in the Word. If
Come on, I need you to go deeper. What changes should I see in myself? What changes should the world see in me if Jesus is truly my king?
I should be more humble.
Humble?
Whenever I come into a situation, I should be calm and not ready to strike back.
Loving.
I should know how to pray more and to govern myself in a way that's better. If he's in my love is totally different. I'm gonna do my best to love everybody.
Okay.
I'm not judging anybody because I know he is the judge of all. I'm gonna look at the behaviors. I'm gonna stand boldly and know that because salvation. And I heard of what people say with COVID, we don't learn how to live with it right now. We let God come in and take over and deliver us. He's our everything. We got to believe that. My faith should be stronger. My outlook should be better.
Also, our appetite has to change. And because when the world, we can't crave the appetite that the world eats on. We should not be eating on the same, we should not have the same menu. Our menu has to change for God, because it just says Samuel was raised a Nazarite. He was raised up in the principles and the precepts of God. So our mindset has to change to do what God wants, or what the precepts and the ordinance of Him. And if the ordinance of Him, we're raised up on the ordinance of God, then that's what our appetite needs to crave. But if we're still craving what the world craves and trying to be in Christ, then we have to understand it. We have to make a choice.
Okay.
Yeah, Pastor, and if we do know and we have Christ as our King, then we're not worried about how green that grass is on the other side of that fence. We're content where we at, because we have the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. So now we're not looking at that other grass, but we're content with what we got here.
You all have answered it. You all have answered it. If Jesus is my king, then I got a change in my allegiance. I got a change in being obedient. I got a change in my priorities. I got a new mission. I've got a new destiny. That's what it means.
Preaching Christ.
You know, Pastor, this also tells us what a stubborn people they were. When you look at verse 18, when Samuel has told them, and they just don't want to hear it. He tells them that what's going to happen with his chosen king. But they still say, no, we want a king. So they were stubborn, they didn't want to be a peculiar people.
I think they came to the table with this agenda already before. They already wanted a king to put even kings in. So now, even though he's telling them, this in essence is their last chance to get it right.
They wanted a king that they could see.
Yes, Lord. Amen. Amen.
They wanted a king that they could see. Any other comments?
I think one word that was left out of that whole conversation was patience. We, as a child of the King, Jesus, should have patience. And the Israelites at that time were not patient people. They wanted to see action. They wanted a worldly king who they could talk to, they could touch, whatever they wanted to do. But with Jesus, they would have to be patient. And they didn't have patience. So that's going to affect how everything works. If you true to Jesus, you have to be patient and wait on Jesus to do what he does when he wants to do it, not when you want him to do it.
That's all right.
I think too, one of the main things that Samuel told them and said that in that day the Lord would not hear you. I think a lot of times, for me, that would be all it took to know that God would not hear me when I need him to hear me, when I speak to him, when I pray to him. I mean, that should be enough for anybody. If somebody tells you that you're doing this stuff or you're in this thing and God is not going to hear you, that's all the reason for you to turn around and come back to him. Because I want him to hear me when I pray to him. I want him to hear me when I read his word and ask him to speak to me. And I think for them not to even listen to that part, not so much of all the other things that were going to happen to them, but to know that God would not hear them when they speak.
Amen. And that's a good point. What Sister Grace said, Pastor, because Samuel, in the midst of all of this, he knew, even though he had one thing in mind, he reverted back to the Lord, the one he knew that was leading and guiding him, the one whose principles he had been raised up and taught him. So even though sometimes we get in our flesh, he knew he had to revert back to God. And that's the thing, like you said, the humility, the humbleness. Even though I may have a decision, I may
demanded a king. They got what they wanted. But thank God the real king stayed with them. He didn't abandon them. He didn't walk away from them. But I want you to understand something, that sometimes, just sometimes, even though God will leave you to your mess and let you wallow in it for a while to make you come to your senses. He will do that. He hasn't abandoned you, but he will let you wallow in your mess for a while and then until you realize who you really are serving, who you call your God. Dr. Griffin,
Yes,
can I get you to close us out with a prayer, please?
yes, I will. God, our Father in heaven, thank you for allowing us to see another day, another Sunday, and another Sunday school lesson, Heavenly Father.
Yes, Lord.
And thank you for all that we've learned this morning, and thank you for your word that you have here for us, that we can learn of you
Yes,
and
Lord.
how you want us to live. Thank you for the lesson this morning. Thank you for the teacher that taught us and gave him what you wanted us to have, Heavenly Father. And dear Lord, I ask you, will you please look over all of those that were not able to tune in this morning and touch all of those that are ill, that had COVID. Lord, please send a blessing upon all of us, Heavenly Father. And we thank you for all that you've done. We thank you for bringing us through another week, dear Lord. Lord, just continue to bless us and keep us, Heavenly Father. And Lord, bless our church, Heavenly Father. We can't meet in person like we used to, Heavenly Father, but you made a way, Lord. Thank you, dear Lord, for social media
Yes,
that we
Lord.
can still connect. And Heavenly Father, we pray for this world. We pray for our leaders, Heavenly Father. We pray for our children, Heavenly Father. They're going back to school, Heavenly Father. We don't know what they're going to do, Heavenly Father.
Yes,
Please
yes.
let them be saved.
Touch 'em.
Oh, dear Lord, we ask all of these things in your Son, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I thank you all for being present. I thank you all for your contributions to the lesson and everything. And I just wanted to say that we are blessed to have Elder Todd with us this morning. We are blessed to have this young gentleman. I think he belongs to the church, Brother Buffy. And I just want to give him a shout out. But thank you all and have a blessed week.
Barrels and things.